Okay, so episode 4. Today we're going to talk about the budget, which happened literally like last week. So it's been a bit of time, but that's allowed the dust to settle and sort of everything to not become more clear. But there's been some debate. I've read some more articles on it in that time. The Times article was pretty interesting. I read, obviously some others, the Financial Times, etc. So I'm Zenon Wiltowski, zenonwilt.com, as my website is. I'm interested in economics and geography and other things like that. But, right now, this episode, we're just going to purely focus on economics. Ben, if you want to introduce yourself, feel free.
Yeah, okay. I'm Ben Wilson. I don't actually study economics, but we often debate and talk about it, so that's why I'm here.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to lay out the economic context first. So, first of all, the UK economy in the last year has grown about 1%. Which, you'd argue it's good news. That's one of the highest growth rates in the G7. I believe it is the highest, other than the US, of course. Which, you can argue how skewed is that number with the US economy. But anyway, we're focusing on the UK. So, so I feel the main issue, though, is that of this 1% growth, right, predominantly it's been in IT and finance, which is, it's mostly in London, right? London is the spearhead of the economy. So, and also of these sectors, right, these tend to be very high-paying jobs, which we'll come to later. And so there isn't really a trickle-down effect on lower income earners. It's predominantly people in these sectors who are already high earners. So, we're not going to have a huge economic effect on this. And rents have risen over 5%. I believe just over 5%, 5.2% or something along these lines. So we need that's short of so we should have had a rent capture device in this budget. Perhaps a land value tax. Big Georges and fan me, but whatever. UK inflation, meanwhile, has dropped to 3.6%. The last ONS release showed, which is still higher than the 2.6% trough we were in September of last year. So inflation has risen overall, but and obviously because of the nature of inflation, unless it's in the negatives, prices continue to rise. So not really good news, but income tax thresholds should counter this and other things. And borrowing is now, like the last budget, predicted to continually fall throughout this parliament. How arguably this is a good thing, as it can reduce inflation as government spending, especially government running a surplus, generally puts extra money into the economy and theoretically boosts inflation, where that's not strictly true. And a lot of government debt is owned by the extremely wealthy, so paying off this debt actually only, makes them more rich and increases their liquidity. So it's again, paying off for government debt at this rate is questionable when we should really be investing in our public services and things. But you can argue. I mean, I'd personally argue against it. But if you're a neoliberal economist or an Austrian economist, you might make the case for this. Did you have anything to add about the economic context?
No, you've actually covered everything that's relevant, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into the tax part now. So I think the biggest headline, right? The biggest thing to talk about is the income tax freeze. For the most part, this was a strategically wise decision by the Chancellor, right? It's a stealth tax. People aren't going to notice it as much. It's sort of smart on her end, but I think ultimately it's probably one of the biggest mistakes of all time, really. Right? Like it technically, in my eyes, it does break their manifesto promise because it is taxing working people more by that wage creep in inflation or not inflation tax bracket creep. So it definitely breaks their promises, and I think obviously in the long run it's going to degrade people's incomes. And factoring in the minimum wage hikes, a minimum wage worker is only going to be about £720 better off. And this benefit is even questionable, right? Because raising minimum wage tends to increase inflation. And, also, like, inflation, as I said, is 3.6%. It's predicted to drop to 2.5% next year. But this persistent inflation is going to degrade that extra £720, even after the minimum wage raises. So, have you got anything to add about income tax freezes? I just think it was an idiotic move, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the main issue with the income tax freeze is not moving the boundaries, but moving the minimum wage up. obviously bringing more people into that wage bracket, but then with inflation, their actual
Well, the minimum wage hikes is going to move people from 22,000 to 23,000 a year, so they're still going to be paying the lowest bracket, but
yeah, but there's also the people that don't work, 40-hour contracts and stuff. I think overall
true.
there'll be a shift, and those people who are shifted, who the people are relying on, so it'll be like,
Yeah,
for
part-time
example, it'll be
part-time
mothers who,
workers are going to be dragged out of that
yeah,
personal
yeah,
allowance.
but anyway, yeah, they're going to be dragged into this new higher tax bracket, but then their purchasing power is lower anyway because of inflation from next year.
And
Obviously, like you said, there's an inflationary effect of just increasing minimum wage anyway.
and just to add to that, yeah, there's also, you have to think about the admin costs, right? Now these part-time workers
Oh,
suddenly do have to pay tax, and so there's the admin cost of figuring out how much they have to pay tax, which is
yeah,
arguably
definitely.
very, very questionable, right? Because you're only going to earn 200, £300 of tax from these part-time workers. How much admin is that going to cost? I mean, it's very marginal, I think.
Yeah.
And of course, it is going to raise the predominant amount that they needed for this budget. I think the figure is about 18 billion. The total raised was 26 billion, so it's some 25%,
Yeah.
75%. Sorry. But they could have raised this in many other ways, and we'll get into that later.
Yep.
So we'll move on to dividend tax now. So
Yep.
dividend slash savings. So in my opinion, there's an incredibly small increase relatively. Dividend tax rose about 2%. So you have the 8.75% base rate. You have the 38.75% secondary rate, which is now going to be 10.75% and 40.75%. And the highest rate, they actually froze. So I think that was really idiotic. I mean, people in the highest rates are going to be by far the wealthiest. So I think that was honestly a huge blunder. They should have kept the base rate at the lowest. They should have froze the base rate at 8.75% and moved the highest rate at 47.75%. Or honestly, just move it in line with income tax. That would have made perfect sense, just like how we do capital gains tax. But that's neither here nor there, I guess.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. What's your main issue with it? Obviously, except for it's a bit disproportionate in terms of who it's affecting the most, but
for sure. Obviously, there's the £500 of dividend that is tax-free. And if you're earning more than £500 in dividends, you're already, probably incredibly wealthy anyway. So, but
yeah. This was a point raised to me by some of my family because they own small businesses. A lot of small businesses don't take out real incomes; they pay themselves through dividends. And I thought it was quite interesting that they increased the basic rate of dividend taxes, but they didn't increase the highest threshold, which is where you'd get most of your tax revenue from the very people who aren't going to miss the extra £10,000 that they're going to get from it.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
very
I mean,
wealthy,
her gibber
very
about
big, large investment portfolios.
yeah, her gibber about targeting the wealthy with this budget was, I mean, it's complete nonsense, right? In my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think pretty much anything represents that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I also have some criticism. I mean, it's definitely an attack on the city, right, rather than the wealthy particularly. With it, targeting those sort of middle earners who do have this who are all exactly as you said, the self-employed small businesses who have this, who are going to be more predominantly affected by this base rate and secondary rate instead of the highest rate or additional rate, as I believe it's called. So yeah, hang on, let me just read my notes. The marginal propensity to save currently stands at 10.7%, but it is much higher than those on higher income. So the fact that we're taxing savings does somewhat level the playing field, right? Because those on higher incomes do that. But I think I'll just get to this point now. Now that we've covered income tax and dividend tax, I think this budget predominantly hit those, as you said, on those who are self-employed and small businesses, but also those who are the top 10% of the economy, not the top 0.1%, who are the asset owners. It's the top 10% who are, the doctors, the high skilled workers that we have. And it's what they've done, I believe, and the Times wrote this in their article, which was surprisingly progressive for the Times, I thought. was Labour have triggered a brain drain, right? It no longer makes sense to be a high-wage, high-skilled worker in the UK. It just doesn't. Yeah, I mean, even a low-skilled worker, it doesn't make sense. We're getting a very raw deal in the modern economy. But the fact that we're still... if you're a low-wage worker, right, you're never going to particularly... in the next 5 years, right, you're not going to really get creeped into that secondary tax bracket. But the fact that they've frozen the tax threshold, pushing more and more people into that, that shadow 60% tax rate above £100,000. The fact that they're getting taxed more on their savings and their dividends, which may be able to supplement their savings. It's all of it is culminating in it's just an attack on the high skilled workers that we have in the economy, which is really what we needed, and is also, as I mentioned earlier, is really what drove the economic development that we've seen in the UK. So I think fundamentally, right, this budget was probably one of the biggest blunders that Labour could have done, because they're promising economic growth, and we're not going to get it now. Because even the small economic growth we have done is being hindered now by the fact that we're having this brain drain. We're hurting the high skilled workers. We're hurting these high wage people who, for the most part, people on high wages have earned those high wages. What we need is to target the actually wealthy, the asset holders who are simply just extracting rents and extracting wealth from the economy for literally no benefit to the economy other than to themselves. And now, we'll get to that with mansion tax, because you can make that argument, but I don't think so. But next, I want to talk about the ISA allowance. So this, obviously, it targeted only under 65s, which I think was a phenomenal blunder, right? So
I don't know why they did this.
Literally,
I have no way to argue for the cash ISA allowance reduction. There is no thing that makes sense to me.
No, it doesn't.
Everyone I've talked to that's over the age of 30 has said that they're all annoyed they've set up ISA now. Every single one of them.
Exactly. All it's done is push people with ISAs out, or not push them out of having an ISA. People are going to still have ISAs, but it's going to really hinder that, and hinder those savings. So being targeted under 65s was really idiotic, and it could have raised a lot more tax revenue if they included over 65s. Really, it was just a boon to pensioners, because it'll make them more competitive, I suppose. I have some stats here. So 40 to 45% of total cash ISA value in the UK economy is owned by over 65s, but they only make up 90% of the population, of the adult population, sorry. So the fact that they're already such a small percentage of a population, but are almost the majority owners of cash ISAs, is ridiculous, right? So the fact that they aren't getting that allowance reduction, which could, I mean, it's not going to free up the market, right? It's mostly based on people's incomes if they can put more cash into ISAs. But the fact that they're going to benefit even more and can continue to benefit more from ISAs when they are already the predominant benefiters from ISAs, it's really going to exacerbate that issue. And also, they benefit the most from government spending, may I add. Pensioners obviously benefit from the NHS, from the state pension, etc. And so the fact that they can continue to generate personal wealth and personal savings through ISAs, while also not leeching the most, but I mean, they are benefiting the most from government spending is really ridiculous, in my opinion.
I suppose this is one of the small arguments you could make for the dividend tax, actually, because these pensioners are allowed to hold larger investments for longer. And I suppose you are taxing them. Actually, no, I don't think they're taxed on dividend tax, are they?
Cash ISAs are tax exempt. That's the whole idea.
No, I mean, yeah, but you add in. Oh no, I was just going to say a lot of private investments as well, not just tax ISAs, because when you're talking about very wealthy people, they normally have private investment portfolios as well, not just regular tax ISAs.
Yeah, they'll be partnered with BlackRock and Vanguard and these investment banks like that, and asset managers.
The issue with that is, when you get to these massive asset managers, then you want to get, then again, talking about the top 0.1%, like you said, but this is not going to affect them. It's like, what multi-millionaire do you know sits with a cash ISA 20 grand a year?
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's an attack on really those, as I said, those slightly higher earners, those higher skilled workers that have I mean, the fact that people have the disposable income nowadays to put into cash ISAs is already rare. And so these high wage workers, high skilled workers that actually are able to, now the fact that their allowance is even less is, it harms them even more, in my opinion. And the fact that pensioners were sort of shielded from this is ridiculous, because as I said, they benefit from most. They should be, when they can, they should be paying into the system, but they aren't. And so now we'll get to that. The mansion tax, which, as I said, is the only tax really that they announced in the budget that will hit those asset holding class, as I've described. But it's horrible.
Second,
it's ridiculous.
Really quickly,
it's so bad.
Really quickly. Save your passion for one moment. Just very quickly, we can put it out there.
Yeah.
They also froze the ban for inheritance tax, which means people, like for example, farmers and stuff like that. I mean, there may be some exceptions, but a lot of people are now more exposed to inheritance taxes as well, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Just to put that on there. Carry on. All right, go on then. Go on. Unleash on the mansion tax.
So, I mean, all right. So it's. I wrote here it's the best of all the changes in my opinion, but it's still completely idiotic simply because of the fact that other property taxes exist and are far superior. The land value tax is of course the best, and actually, even of the mansion taxes, this is the worst mansion tax I have ever seen. Right? You could very easily make it progressive. It's pseudo progressive in that every 500 grand it goes up another £500 or something like that. It goes from 2,500 and then scales up every 500 grand until you get to 5 million, where it stops at 7.5 grand. Keeping in mind this is annually. This isn't monthly. This is annually. So people who, if you own a £2 million mansion, right, or a £2 million house, right, it doesn't necessarily have to be a mansion. That's why the name's misleading. You're only spending 2.5k a year extra, which is very, very, very little. It is
in fact 0.125% of the property of the value. The value of the property. Sorry.
Exactly. It's such a small amount that it's essentially negligible. And if you own a house of that value, there's a very good chance you either own a lot more houses than just that one, or you own a lot more assets than just that. Right, so if you own a £2 million house, even that small percentage value of the house is probably an even smaller percentage value of their total net worth. And this is what I wrote here, is the fact that this isn't like a property tax on all your property value. This is a property tax on your single primary residence. I mean, if you own several houses worth over 2 million, then yes, but I mean, if you're a landlord, you don't own several houses over 2 million because no one is renting that. If you're a landlord, you're owning houses worth, between 100 grand and maybe 600 grand because they're the maximum rent extraction. Unless you're in like a £10,000 house in Grimsby, which, I mean, probably most of them are valued at that, but.
The mansion tax completely missed the point of land value taxes. Or similar property taxes.
And it
actually, it works really, really badly as well with the other taxes we have currently.
Exactly. It doesn't coincide with council taxes at all, because council taxes, ironically, obviously work on property values from 1991. So council taxes are hugely undervalued, and mansion taxes, in my mind, are hugely overvalued. So we have this disconnect now. What they should have done is updated council taxes, first of all.
Yeah.
With better property values and better system. Right, again, I'll reiterate it. A land value tax would have been the best option here. This is the other thing, right? Even in a land value tax, one of the best features of it is that it pushes out speculators and it stops land hoarding and property hoarding. This mansion tax doesn't even disincentivize property hoarding. All it does is incentivize people to hire tax lawyers to minimize the value of their house. So it does very little. And I mean, I haven't seen this yet, and this might be just me, being a nihilist. But I can very easily imagine people hiring tax lawyers, undervaluing their house, selling their house once they actually want to at a hugely overvalued rate. Obviously, therefore, having to admit that new value of their house, but then never having to pay that tax. And then, the moment someone buys that house, they'll devalue it again with a tax lawyer and other things. It's very easy to minimize the effect of this tax. And even if they didn't, the fact that it's such a little amount, it means absolutely nothing essentially. So
it was
and all of this,
really
by the way, all of this for £400 million in total tax revenue. Absolutely meaningless.
Well, projected
As well,
they
yeah.
definitely have not closed any loopholes. In fact, I'd say they've opened even more loopholes.
Yeah, as I just
especially
described,
in terms
that
of, like,
loophole.
investing into property. Yeah,
Very easily people can
So-
avoid it. So yeah, I think completely idiotic. A land value tax would have been better. A proportional property tax would have been better. Any property tax would have been better than this tax. A wealth tax would have hit the wealthy better, etc. Right? So yeah. So there's two more taxes to talk about. We have the electric car duty. So this is coinciding with decreasing electricity duties. So there's the theoretically it's going to be cheaper to charge your electric car now, but obviously now it's more expensive to drive your electric car, and it sort of makes sense, right?
Yep.
If you drive an electric car, you're using the road and you're incurring damage to that road. But 3p a mile, I feel, is a bit steep, and really it was clearly just another measure to fill in the gap, and it sort of messes with the net zero goals, right? It's gonna hinder apparently. The OBR projects that about 119,000 electric cars are going to be less electric cars are going to be bought a year now because of this. So obviously that's going to hinder the net zero goals, and I mean on top of that also, it's just going to reduce. It won't necessarily reduce the usage of electric cars as a whole. People aren't going to sell their electric cars now because it's still more expensive to drive diesel and petrol cars. But like. The fact that they introduced this in the first place really reduces that economical aspect to electric cars, I think. And this isn't even to mention the fact that obviously we're very slowly seeing the introduction of electric trucks and things like that. So obviously I think hydrogen trucks are going to be the way forward, but again, they're yet to be seen. So I think in the next 5 or 10 years, this tax is going to become very, very big amongst transport industries.
Yeah, I mainly agree. I think one of the things that that I've seen firsthand, as well as I've also seen some statistics that are supporting it, with this tax and it de-incentivizing people to buy electric cars, we can probably see a migration of the price to go down. I've seen a lot of, like, for example, electric based or hybrid vehicle. Hybrid's a little bit different, actually. I'd say hybrids are probably going to be more in favor now instead of just electric.
Certainly.
However, electric cars, because obviously demand's going to lower, and so to meet that market, they have to put the price down, and which sounds good. You're incentivizing people who may not be as financially secure to be able to buy electric cars, but then you've got this 3p per mile, which is very steep for people who aren't, they don't have £60,000 discretionary income.
Especially in rural areas such as where we live, right? It's gonna. I mean, people drive on average 15 miles a day here, and that's on the low end. So that's a tax of about 45p a day, which over the course of a year is adding up to almost £100 a year just for driving an electric car, which isn't comparable to fuel duty. Fuel duty is still inconceivably more than that. But the fact that electric cars flat out are more expensive than petrol cars, it really doesn't help, especially in rural areas.
I'm also going to say the context it now gives behind buying an electric car will also be a massive de-incentivizer for people to make the move. And the issue with that is obviously it was not very economical, obviously, as you said, about the fuel duty and so, but also the progression for net zero as well.
I mean, it kills the efficacy of ULEZ zones, right? It doesn't completely stop it in its tracks, but the thing about ULEZ was it was a charge on people for driving on roads with high emission cars, but now there's a charge for driving on roads with low emission cars. Obviously, the charge is less, but the charge is still there, right? Nonetheless, so it massively reduces that as a mechanism to incentivize electric cars.
Yeah. Also, one of the issues with electric cars was it was a way to have a trickle down economy, because you'd have these higher paid, higher earners being able to then buy electric cars and so on and so forth, and then
sell them
have more higher skill workers going up. Exactly. But now
Yeah.
you won't have that because people are de-incentivized from buying it, which I think is another, as you would say, blunder in the thinking of this type of policy.
Certainly. Okay, so the last thing I have on tax here is the pension salary cap. So pension sacrifices in the coming year will no longer be tax exempt, anything above £2,000 a year. So employers often make further contributions to employee pension savings due to the national insurance exemption, and that will likely become less frequent now. And this could have a knock-on effect of raising incomes as people save less into pensions, right? So you could make the argument that, this is a good thing. It's going to raise people's incomes. It's going to stimulate the economy. But as we discussed earlier, they froze the income tax thresholds. So even this is a questionable effect, right? That's going to have some effect on consumer spending. And with the aging population, it feels like it kicks the can down the road, and it pulls the ladder up for people who want pensions later on. With pension savings propping up a lot of the economy right now, and that's going to become more and more apparent as the aging population continues to age. Pensions are going to continue to keep the economy flowing. And unless we can completely revitalize the pensions, we're not gonna we're gonna face a demographic issue inevitably.
Yeah, I think my main issue with this is everything else that's come with it. If there was some good, like you said, land value tax policies, some better income tax policies, I don't think this would necessarily be a bad thing because it'd put a little bit more liquidity into the market.
Exactly. Yeah.
However, everything else that's come with it is just adding. Is just going to be, well, I can't say this, but it would just be a net negative. There's nothing this is going to do to improve the current economy in terms of like more people buying into the economy.
I mean, especially when you factor in the fact that cash ISA allowances are obviously not frozen for above 65s, right? This is really causing a generational divide, right? You have these people who never suffered from this pension salary cap issue, and can continue to profit from their ISAs and continue to funnel more money into their ISAs, while you have people now suffering from the pension salary cap with their cash ISA freezing, with the issue of obviously the aging demographic crisis. So we're going to see more tax revenue funneling into the state pension. It's just this huge issue which is being totally ignored and could very easily be fixed, with a wealth tax, with a land value tax, with just a better tax system, really. And instead we're imposing these rules which could theoretically be better. A pension salary cap could be better, as we just talked about. But instead we aren't, because we don't have the tax system to fund it. We don't have the public investment and the economic growth to supplement it. And we don't have the productivity growth. And we're going to, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we see productivity slowly decline. Because again, as I described earlier, we're going to suffer from a brain drain from, punishing these high wage, high skill workers, from punishing those who are investing and saving money rather than, just consuming mindlessly. Etc. So, yeah, I think all of these the budget in terms of taxes, completely idiotic. Really, it could have been so much better. Richard Murphy had a really interesting alternative budget, which was about 40 minutes long. We could go into, a lot of detail on that, but I think no. Instead, we're talking about this budget, so we'll move on to spending now, which is a lot less actually. But I have about four things here. Four main things.
Yeah, I actually didn't really cover anything for this as well. Go on.
Well, I know you have some views about the two-child benefit cap being lifted. So, in my opinion, I honestly don't necessarily disagree with this one, but I want you to start with your thoughts.
Okay, my thoughts. So, a lot of my thoughts came from also the context of what's happening with the wider tax reliefs, tax changes which have come on. So, firstly, I kind of grounded my arguments in the fact that small businesses and lower middle class workers, the higher skill but not like doctors, for example, more like mechanics and stuff like that, they're going to be so de-incentivized to work or to properly tax themselves or report their taxes. Firstly, because of how they're freezing the tax brackets and so on and so forth. Dividend tax for smaller businesses. Anyway, moving on. with the two-child gap, one, I fully understand that our growing population right now is really low. We have a really low birth rate, so we do need to figure out a method to promote not necessarily younger people, but promote people to have more kids. However, we need to have the environment to bring these kids in, so it's not putting more pressure on our systems, like our adoption system or them type of systems. With this, we've seen over the past, I think it's 15 years, I saw a general increase in people claiming benefits, but then we've also not seen the comparable um, like what was it means test to ensure that people are actually able to not work and make sure people who would be able to work and provide into the economy are. And I think I worked it out with the budget. If you're living outside of London, you make roughly £500 less if you have 3 kids with the child benefits. Which,
Is that a
firstly,
year?
that's per year.
Yeah.
So,
That's not much.
you say it's not much, but you also don't have to do anything, and then you can also work on the side, which is very popular with
That's
people who
outside
can
of
work but
London,
don't.
right?
Yeah, but that's outside of London where the
So
prices
in
aren't.
London, how much
Sorry,
more
the
is
cost
it?
of living are going to be high. In London, it goes up from just under 20,000 to just over 25,000 in a couple.
That's okay, fair enough. I mean, yeah, I mean, the fact that we have to have different rates for London is already insane. It just shows a two-speed economy.
Yeah,
But,
it says a lot. But
I think
my
I don't
main
know
point is just
because
go on.
hang on, are you done making your point now? Because I think
I was just going to wrap it up
okay.
by saying I just think it de-incentivizes low skill workers from wanting to work. I think if you see someone who's able to earn as much as you and you don't have to work for 40 hours on minimum wage, 52 weeks of a year, why would you want to go to work? Why wouldn't you just lay off and say, oh, no, I can't work, I've got so and so illness?
Well, as I described earlier, we do have this demographic crisis of an aging population. And of course, immigration can supplement that by, bringing in these working age people who will, they do tend to work these low skill jobs. Other than obviously the high skill workers the new visa requirements actually make it very difficult to be a low wage worker, a low skill worker immigrant. But anyway, I think but the main reason behind this policy, right, is that of reducing child poverty. And the OBR projections show it, and the ONS predictions, they show it very clearly, right, that it is going to reduce child poverty. And I mean, 30 to 35% of low-income household expenditure, right, goes towards mortgages, and 20 to 25% goes towards food. So, I mean, the picture I've just described, right, it very much shows we have a cost of living crisis, and so supplementing, child benefit a bit more helps. But again, as I just described, a ridiculous amount goes to household. I'm messing with words. A ridiculous amount goes towards mortgages and things like that, and a ridiculous amount goes towards food. And I think that's a fundamental issue with the economy, is everything is just expensive because of speculation, because of inflation, because of all of these other issues. And so the child benefit cap feels more like a plaster on a wound, than actual surgery. You could fix the household, the mortgage issue and the housing crisis issue with a land value tax and by incentivizing more development. You could fix the food issue by just subsidizing food more and really revitalizing the agricultural sector, which I feel has been sort of underinvested. It's very rare to have public investment into agriculture, which is sort of fair enough, but with things like agrivoltaics and hydroponics for city farming and other things, we could very much have a far more revitalized agricultural sector. And, doing things like rejoining the EU and easing rules on imports and exports, we could very easily, again, see food prices go back down. So I think the highest issue towards child poverty are these big things, which the child benefit cap will help a little bit against by providing children, low income families with this, this dividend, I suppose. But I mean, again, it doesn't address the key issue. So it's a good policy. It will do what it's intended for, and it isn't hugely expensive. But it doesn't address the actual issues at hand, and that's my issue with it. It's not a bad policy. I think it should exist, and it should exist alongside these other policies that would actually help, right? But the fact that we have this policy and we don't have the other policies that would help, it just shows a fundamental issue. So that's my issue with it.
I agree with you.
Hmm.
I think your take was actually very correct in the sense that it's the policy itself isn't wrong, but like the intention behind it. However, I think the execution is where my biggest gripe with it comes. I think if we had this policy in a fast-growing, high-earning economy that's well distributed, and you didn't have loads and loads of wealth hoarding speculation in the property market, I think it would very much help decrease poverty within like slums of England. However, like we've said this entire time, this entire what's it called? This entire autumn. Oh my god! I'm just sorry. I'm going absolutely blank right now. What's it? Autumn budget. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This entire autumn budget makes this less effective by miles, which is my main issue. I think
building on that point just quickly. I need to add. So, of the low-income household expenditures I was just describing, 30-35% goes towards mortgages or rent, 20-25% goes towards food. But then 10% goes towards electricity, which should go down in price with the changes to electricity duty. Now, not the renewable subsidy not being on energy bills now and going towards government, being from government spending. So that 10% should go down, but another 10% goes towards transport, which with the 3p road charge on electric cars, there aren't a huge amount of low-income households with electric cars, but the small fraction that do are going to incur an even higher cost now. So that's something to factor in.
Yeah, I think one of the other issues with this is with how the economy is going to progress in terms of inflation. I think also employment and also variability in terms of small businesses. I think the environment, economically speaking, is going to get a lot worse, and so you're going to be giving these people more subsidies in terms of child benefits. However, it's still going to be I think it's either going to be as or even less affordable purely because of how this tax is going to have a knock-on effect for the economy.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, going back to my food inflation point, I actually have this in my notes. I didn't see it until now. Food inflation is going to be, somewhat covered by the fact that free school meal expansion, is included in this budget. But again, right? It's not going to massively help against like food costs, right? For the family as a whole, it's going to help with kids who are in school, but obviously there's younger kids who aren't in school. And there's kids, in the post-16s who aren't necessarily in school getting the free meals. They might be doing apprenticeships, which might not necessarily have free meals included in their apprenticeship. So, it's not a catch-all. And obviously, predominantly, children with lower incomes aren't going to, sixth form or college. They are doing these apprenticeships. And even then, it's questionable. A lot of them do fall through the gaps because of, this underinvestment and, just overall, like, depravity, right? So...
yeah.
We'll get on to energy bills now. Or have you got anything to add?
No, go for it.
So the shift from electricity duty to taxation rather than on individual bills, it's a good one, right? And it's going to aid in household budgets, and it should be somewhat deflationary. But I think the Chancellor missed the opportunity here to introduce a carbon tax to, further help the green shift. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a flat carbon tax on everything. It could just be a carbon tax on large corporations, right? We already defined large corporations as those with revenue over 250,000, as shown by the corporation tax brackets. So you could have a carbon tax on large corporations, and if you're familiar with energy economics, right, a carbon tax doesn't just, tax carbon. It also makes things that you would usually be uneconomical become economical in reducing carbon emissions. So if you say, this is a concept that is laid out perfectly in the McKinsey curve. If you have a $20 carbon tax, if something originally would cost $10 to reduce a ton of carbon, it would obviously without a carbon tax be unaffordable. But if you now spend that $10 when the carbon tax is $20, you're actually saving another $10, right? So if you had like a $20 carbon tax, which is really on the low end, it would make an investment like that make more sense and ease the energy transition without even necessarily incurring a huge cost. Because as I said, a £20 per ton carbon tax isn't huge. I mean, there's been carbon taxes in other in countries that is to the tune of £100 plus. So the fact that we don't have one in the UK, we have carbon credits, right, which act as a carbon control, but a carbon tax is the best in terms of aiding that green transition and also raising some government tax revenue. So I mean, if Labour really want to aid that green transition, which they've sort of harmed with the electric car duty thing and with the energy bill reform, because this is, I mean, it's not going to necessarily provide as much funding now for renewables necessarily. So I think they missed out on introducing the carbon tax. So again, this budget as a whole summed up, right, it's just a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't know. I just reading over all the different changes and stuff, and I'm just a little bit speechless right now.
So just to build on that though, so support schemes and like energy efficiency measures have also come to an end, and they were often subsidized for low-income households. So that's going to further exacerbate pressures on the grid, right? Because they want to build all these new houses, but there's no longer the subsidies for energy efficiency. So what we're going to see is energy demand continuing to go up, and it's going to go up at an even greater rate than what it would have been. So we're going to see. I mean, like, arguably, we're going to see even more expensive electricity if Labour really do, build those 1.5 million homes, which so far it looks like they're not going to hit at all. So I mean, it's questionable.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that they're moving it to taxation was good, but the fact that we've removed these subsidies, which would help energy efficiency, which would also reduce the cost of it because people are consuming less electricity because of the energy efficiency, it's sort of, again, another big blunder, right? They could have renewed those subsidies and continued that, but it was just a huge oversight, really, I think.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, that's gonna one of the big arguments for renewable electricity is not just obviously it's sustainable, it's renewable, and it's just good for the environment. Is that also it's cheaper, but it isn't necessarily going to be cheaper. If energy demand keeps going up and goes up at a greater rate because we don't have those energy efficiency subsidies anymore. I know it's for low-income households, for the most part, but I mean, low-income households are going to become more and more common as people become more and more poor because of these tax thresholds freezings and the other issues with the economy, such as the housing crisis. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think. Go on. Is there any
I was
other?
just going to move on to the next
points?
section. There's two more sections
go on.
to talk about. So there's the train/prescription freeze, which is overall good, I suppose. Train tickets in the UK are the most expensive in Europe, so freezing it does help against this issue. But again, they're the most expensive in Europe, so until we see those prices coming down, I don't see any benefit really. I think the fundamental issue isn't you're not going to fix it by freezing the prices. You're going to fix it by building better rail, more efficient rail, more economic rail. Electric rail would cost less, but we don't have the money apparently, despite the fact India has done it 5 or so years ago, if not like even longer ago, right? The fact that India has a fully electrified rail system, but the UK doesn't, it speaks testament to our underinvestment, right? It's insane. So I think freezing it was a step in the right direction, but until we see, greater investment and really see those train prices come down, I know some people argue for complete free public rail, which I wouldn't be opposed to, but it's going to come at a cost. And with a current tax system, right, and with a current government, the way they're going to pay for that is by fiddling around with income tax, is by fiddling around with dividend and savings tax, and they're never going to introduce an actually feasible, radical new tax, like a carbon tax, like a land value tax, like a wealth tax. So, yeah.
Speaking socially as well, I think that's one of the key words there. I think putting so much pressure onto these lower income households is going to make such a radical change in society in terms of their belief systems. I think I know right now there's a really hot topic with immigration and
I
so
mean
on and so forth.
that's why we've seen such a surge in the far right in terms of reform, and I wouldn't say the
Yeah,
Greens are
this is
far
what I'm going
left,
to.
but they're certainly more left wing than Labour and Lib Dems, right? So we've seen a surge in
Yep.
the left and a surge in the far right, and I think that's for good
Yeah.
reason. I recently joined the Greens a week or two ago. It was only £6 a year, so I might as well have to. I was like, I might as well. But yeah, I think there's good reason for these. Not necessarily good reason for reform. I think a lot of it is based in racism, but I mean, a lot of that is because people aren't informed. They see all these new immigrants coming in, and I mean, it's undeniable. We had 1 million immigrants coming in 2023, and I wouldn't necessarily that's a bad thing, but I mean, it's an undeniable truth. And in that time, people's standard of living has gone down. Correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, but you know, when you're constantly seeing your standard of living going down and you see this astronomical figure, you know, people are going to make assumptions, and you know, until you actually target the issue at hand, which is wealth inequality, which is the housing crisis, which is, you know, the absolutely ridiculous, you know, food price inflation and things like that, which we experienced from the post-COVID and supply side shock. You know, people are going to continue to conflate this issue. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the like hidden issues with this budget, because sure, it's like fiscally it's a massive issue. Well, not massive, but it is going to become an issue. But also socially and more like how people act democratically is going to shift people to more extremes, which could become an even bigger hindering problem within the UK.
Okay, so we'll get to the last point now, which is the infrastructure investment. So this remained largely unchanged from the last budget, and in my opinion, it's one of the better things that Labour's doing. Right, they're expanding rail, they're expanding bus routes, they're expanding all of these public services, and public transportation is hugely important, especially in like these urban areas with you know, large congestion charges and things like that. And you know, there is a huge need for more public transport, absolutely, especially in reducing carbon emissions. If people don't make that electric car transition because it's so expensive, then they need an alternative, and that alternative is public transport. Not even necessarily green public transport, right? You could still have a completely, you know, you could have a diesel train, you can have a diesel bus, right? And the fact that, you know, that bus is transporting 50 people, the fact that that train is transporting 500 people, rather than, you know, that ridiculously high number of people each individually driving a car, is already massively reducing carbon emissions. So the need for more infrastructure investment, the need for more public transport is necessary, and that is one of the better things that Labour is doing, alongside their investment into green energy with GB Energy and things like that. Great British Energy.
Yeah, 100%.
So like macroeconomic investment, however, it could end up like the HS2, where it's just massively overdue, massively over budget, and honestly, the benefit is questionable, right? You know, you're shaving a small number of minutes off of a you know, a journey from London to Birmingham. You know, for what really? You know, not much. So yeah. And, you know, I think the biggest issue is just the extensive bureaucracy. I don't like to, you know, throw around, oh, the UK suffers from bureaucracy. That's a very, you know, a very Thatcherite term. That was a big talking point of Thatcher. But, I mean, it is true, right? We have ridiculous planning permission. You look at our tax code, it's the longest in the world. I believe it's 60,000 words. Italy, which is a relatively similar tax rate to us, is only 20,000 words. If my memory serves me correct. So, you know, we have this big bureaucratic issue, and we do need to cut through that government tape. I don't like to say it, but I mean, you could make the argument the UK could benefit from a Doge potentially, but not in the Elon Musk form, more in the form of just hire a load of lawyers and just let them go crazy cutting back on the tax code, but not necessarily cutting back on the tax code in removing all the loophole clauses, cutting back on the tax code and then funding HMRC more to enforce that tax code to stop the loopholes. Because you don't necessarily need to fill the tax code up with loophole clauses. You just need the tax code to be very clear cut, and then have the HMRC really, really enforce that tax code. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. Which was actually part of her last budget, I believe. Last year's budget did mention greater HMRC capabilities to reduce that, you know, tax avoidance. But
Yeah. Although I would argue if you did close a lot of the tax loopholes, then the people who are abusing these tax loopholes are the people who are earning so much that they are hiding a majority of the UK wealth in assets and so on and so forth. So I don't know. I would say that's probably a good thing.
Well, yeah, but then you're forgetting, right? We don't have a wealth tax, we don't have a land value, we don't have any of these taxes that
Yeah,
could
there's
theoretically.
no
No, I
no
mean,
way
a
to
land value
dispute.
tax is hard to avoid, but like a wealth tax, for example, a wealth tax could have loopholes, right? But we don't have a wealth tax, so the fact that our tax
Yeah.
code is so long, while it isn't even necessarily that advanced, is kind of it's kind of crazy. But yeah. So, I mean, overall, that's the summation of the budget. That's
Yeah.
the economic context, the taxing and the spending sorted. So, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, actually. My overall opinion of this budget is that it is going to completely strip small businesses from their ability to one become affordable and two compete with like massive organizations. Um, Partly because of having to like the increased price of employment, two because of fiscal drag from the frozen tax brackets, three from the dividend tax, and four from other secondary issues in terms of like for example, you brought up the um, ISAs and so on and so forth. So I don't know. I can imagine over the next couple of years we're going to see a massive, not maybe not a decrease in um, small businesses, but I think definitely in the growth of small businesses, which I think is going to be one of the main corner points of what's going to take politically. Because one major issue in the political spectrum is supporting these small businesses, supporting these higher medium skill professions. And I just genuinely don't see the support right now. I think, in fact, it's going to very much harm these areas of work.
Agreed. And I think a lot of that honestly stems from the fact that Labour has, I mean, undeniably been bought out by the corporations, right? I mean, at the start of just before they were elected, there was that big news about the CEO of Iceland supporting Labour, which was a bit of a surprise. But I think it's blatantly obvious now what happened, and what happened is Labour, who was meant to be the party of the people, is now instead the party of the corporations. And
Yeah,
and until you
100%.
get money out of politics, that issue is never going to be fixed. And the
Yeah.
budget is going to continue every single year to be a missed opportunity and to continue to be a drag, not necessarily on the working people and not necessarily on the high wage people, as we saw in this budget, but just a tax not on the wealthy and not necessarily on the corporations, which were certainly harmed last year. But, it was really, as you said, those lower income corporations, those small family businesses that are predominantly hit by the tax rises.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually pretty much everything. It'll be very interesting next 12 to 18 months, I think, and I think the information that's going to come out in the reports is going to be very telling in the effects of this. I don't think it's going to be the way the Labour Party intends, though.
Certainly.